Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. Tonight, we've got the political editor of The Sun, Harry Cole, and senior associate editor of The New Statesman, Rachel Cunliffe, with us until just before midnight. There they are. So let's see what's on some of those front pages. Killed for kicks, the latest disturbing evidence of apparent Russian war crimes coming out of Ukraine is the lead in the Metro, which pictures the mayor of one town who was killed and dumped in a mass grave along with her husband and her son. As a result, says The Times, Britain is demanding even tougher sanctions on Vladimir Putin's regime. But The Eye reports that European powers are split over how to put further economic pressure on Russia to stop the war. The Financial Times says France is pushing for a ban on all Russian coal and oil as America calls for a trial over war crimes in Ukraine. Climate change leads The Guardian, with the latest warning from scientists that it's now or never to act to stave off a global disaster. The news that the government is planning to privatise the TV company Channel 4, that's the top story in The Telegraph. The Mail has what it calls a huge boost for women's rights, with news that gyms, hospitals and shops will in the future be able to offer single-sex services such as toilets and changing rooms. The pre-Easter chaos at ports and airports is on the front of The Star with the headline, "Wish we weren't here." And The Sun pays tribute to EastEnders actress June Brown, who played Dot Cotton for over 3 decades and has died at the age of 95. And a reminder, by scanning the QR code you see on your screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. And as I was saying, joined tonight by Harry Cole and Rachel Cunliffe. Harry and Rachel, good evening to you both. Thank you so much for chatting through the papers with us. Let's start with The Eye, shall we? And really, the story that's captured most of the media for the past 24 hours or so. Harry, do you want to talk us through what they're saying and why they say Europe is split on funding Putin's war following these claims of war crimes in Bucha?
Yeah, it's been one of those sort of 96 hours, really, where you've tried to focus attention elsewhere, write stories about Channel 4 and climate change and energy strategies, and you just can't escape out the corner of your eye those horrific images on the television screens and across the internet, across the front pages tomorrow, of the horrific trail of devastation that the fleeing Russian troops have left in their wake. And while those images are coming out of Ukraine are deeply shocking, there's an underlying fear around them that this is just one small retreat from one town that a large amount of these images are coming from, and makes you sort of shudder to think what's going on in other parts of Ukraine where the Russian troops are continuing their occupation, especially in Mariupol, where there haven't been cameras or journalists or TV crews really able to get anywhere near it in any meaningful way for some weeks now because of that horrific shelling and bombardment. And I think this might just be the tip of an iceberg of Putin's horrific war crimes. And it's good to see the world sort of catching up on calls to, I think people will be quite sympathetic to slightly more than just putting Putin in the dock. Perhaps calls for even worse retribution than that.
But are they catching up, though? Because if you look at the front of The Eye, they say that Europe is split on funding Putin's war, and that's key, isn't it? Is that he's still earning huge amounts of money every day from these payments for oil and gas. Rachel, what do you think?
Well, it's those two news lines, isn't it? One is the horrific images that Harry was talking about, and the growing realization of exactly what it is that Russian troops have been doing in the places that they've occupied and have now withdrawn from. And then akin to that is, what is the West going to do about it? And particularly, what is Europe going to do about it? So immense pressure on France and Germany in particular to be tougher on sanctions. The line coming from the Ukrainian President Zelensky, but also from the UK, that Putin's war machine is being funded directly by oil and gas revenues paid for by France and Germany. Now, before the war, Germany's imported 55% of its gas from Russia. France imports 20% of its gas. We were in the middle of an energy crisis even before the Russian invasion. Prices are spiking. across the world when it comes to energy prices. So you can understand a certain reluctance on the part of the European leaders to make life even harder for their citizens. Unfortunately, that reluctance has a cost, and that cost really could be seen in the prolonging this conflict. And I think very, very emotive language from Zelensky earlier, inviting Angela Merkel and Nicolas Sarkozy, the former leaders of France and Germany, to come and see what has happened in Bucha and to see evidence of these war crimes as a direct result of their policy of Putin appeasement over the last 14 years.
The front of the Times, Britain calling for tougher sanctions on Russia. Liz Truss has said that we need a new wave of sanctions. Harry, one could argue, or one could ask the question, why are we already not imposing the toughest sanctions that we possibly can?
It's a very good point. There very much is, it is literally cutting one's nose off to spite one's enemies. You might say there is a next level you could go to, which is complete economic isolation of Russia. That's almost a sort of it is a sort of thing that one country alone cannot do. It has to be done completely united, or it will not work at all. And there's a real feeling in Europe, actually, that Germany have talked a good game so far. They came out the traps at the beginning of this conflict. They tore up their long-standing constitutional rules on military aid and cancelled the Nord Stream 2 project, even though the fact that US would have probably cancelled it for them if they had not had the choice with sanctions on it. But that seems to be a bit of backsliding now. And the West has been remarkably united so far in the response to Putin's invasion, but that is beginning to creak now. And you've got the Poles. The Polish government have launched an astonishing attack on President Macron today, saying, why are you still on the phone to Putin all the time? Would you have negotiated with Hitler? A very deliberate, jarring reference there to French history, and saying the same to Germany, directly pointing the finger at Germany and saying, look, you are the roadblock, they said, to further sanctions. So I think it's important that sort of NATO alliance and the Western alliance tries to stay united, but within the EU, those tensions are really starting to fray now.
Let's bring up the front of the Times and this picture of Zelensky, and it's heartbreaking seeing his reaction. But our teams have been into Bucha and filmed firsthand these pictures that we can't even show, really. Russia, Zelensky is saying, has committed genocide. That's what Zelensky is saying, right? But Rachel, what happens next? So if we collect evidence and it's taken to the ICC, but will people actually be held to account, and have they in the past?
Well, I think there are two questions there. There is, what do we do now, or what can the West do now? And then the second question is, when all this is over, what are the consequences going to be for Putin, for the Russian government, and for those who committed these war crimes? I think we're a bit far away from that now. That the focus for everyone is trying to bring an end to this conflict. But there's an interesting point that kind of links to that, and links to the argument about sanctions and why aren't we doing more and why aren't they more effective, which is, sanctions are kind of only half of it. Putin is not particularly interested in sanctions as long as he is able to continue with this. What he is interested in is the votes and the opinions of the Russian people. And I think we need to remember that there is a parallel war going on in Russia itself, which is a war of misinformation. And Russia's response to the horrific pictures we've seen is that they've all been staged, and that the entire thing has been made up by Ukraine, which is horrific in itself. But people in Russia do believe that. That's what they're being shown every day on their TV screens. Very telling detail in the reports from Bucha that the soldiers there, who are the Russian soldiers, who are exhausted and demoralized for fighting a war that they didn't necessarily think they were going to be fighting when they set out, but going from house to house, asking where the Nazis are. This narrative that Putin has sort of constructed for himself and for the Russian people, that this isn't an invasion, this is Russia defending itself against the phantom menace of Nazis, which which doesn't exist in Ukraine, but that is the narrative. And the narrative is one that the Russian soldiers believe. It's one that many of the Russian people believe. And as long as they keep believing that and keep supporting Putin, he has a very clear reason to continue with this violence.
And one that is reflected, or that mindset of the Russian troops is reflected on the front of the metro, isn't it, Harry? Killed for kicks, they say.
Yeah, look, you can blame Putin for this, and everyone will. And this invasion was horrific, but it's hard to escape the fact that every single invading Russian force in history has done this to every single land that it has invaded. The echoes of the Polish invasion, the Katyn massacre, this dates back. This tactic, this horrific behavior, sadly, is nothing new. And yes, we can get ahead of ourselves, but it needs to be documented. There was a time when Milosevic looked like he was never going to be brought to justice. Radovan Karadzic ended up in The Hague. It can be done, but the evidence needs to be collected now. Yes, more than a task force of evidence collectors needs to be sent from the European Union and from Britain and from America. But it is very important that it is done properly, because that case does need to be made, because these people need to be brought to justice, and it will take years and decades possibly. But this is a sort of attack on humanity that cannot be allowed to pass, but sadly one that we've seen so many times before.
Harry, let's start with The Guardian. This IPCC report, a damning report that on any other day would make the front of all the papers, wouldn't it, Harry?
Maybe.
Or not.
Kind of like, I mean, they sort of slightly have heard this one before, haven't we? I know that. I think the fact that COP was hosted by the UK last year slightly amplified, every single utterance of the UN. But at a time when people are struggling with energy bills, working out how they're going to keep the lights on, choosing between heating and eating, the shocking reports we had today about people unable to even afford to take food from a food bank that requires heating. You just think, pick your moments, pick your battles. There is a discussion to be had about energy, but when clowns start gluing themselves to oil refineries, potentially, saying that we should abandon oil overnight, when to do so.
Yeah, but we have to do something about it, don't you think?
Yes, of course we do. But yes, we do. But we are on a course of transition to being carbon neutral by 2050. And I just think, look, just pick your moments. There are bigger things to fry today, right now, in people's minds than yet another same old report from the UN, which says exactly the same thing as the UN report they said 3 months ago, and the one we wrote 3 months before that. We get it. Look, we're listening. Everyone's paying attention, but let hectoring people about the use of fossil fuels, which is, at the moment when it is almost like the last thing they want is a lecture while trying to keep themselves warm, I think is a little bit timid.
Okay, we don't have enough time to get into that, because I really want to talk about who we've lost today, Rachel. Dot. She was on EastEnders for 35 years and she left us. 95 years old she was.
She joined 5 months after it launched, EastEnders launched, which I wasn't aware of. I used to watch it as a teenager. My mum absolutely hated that me and my sister watched it. It was our form of teenage rebellion. And even then, I remember noticing that she was just a phenomenal actress, and what she was able, the complex themes that she was able to communicate and portray and talk about on that show. The fact that she managed to was able to do an entire episode just her, which I think is a first in soap history. I think she got a BAFTA nomination for that. An absolute institution on our screens.